Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another exciting edition of the Our Girlington podcast. Today, alhamdulillah, we have a new co-host, which I'm going to introduce to you shortly. But today's podcast is about green space and well-being. One of our main drivers to try getting this podcast on and try getting our expert panel in today was the pandemic has been going on for so long. And people have been down. We've been allowed to go out, and so we wanted to get someone on who can help us just understand a little bit and understand the areas, understand what the benefits of green space and well-being. So we just set this podcast up to try bringing some of that topic to life and try helping us in this time, and even going forward once we get out of this pandemic, to help us understand the benefits of green space and well-being. So before we get on to the topic, I want to introduce our new co-host. So Sister Abida has been on a couple of episodes ago. You should have seen that episode. It was about child obesity, and she did so well. We've introduced her back as one of our team to help co-host us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw it over to Sister Abida and let her introduce our guest today. Sister.
Okay, assalamu alaikum everyone. Thank you so much for having me, Barbara. So with it being my first time, go easy on me. So it's wonderful to have Tahira with us today. So Tahira Amin is a registered dietitian, and she is also representing Abilities Together, which is a local project in, I believe, is it the Heaton area?
We cover the whole Bradford area.
Fantastic, the whole of Bradford. Yeah, so today Tahira's going to talk to us about green space and well-being and how important it is, like Barbara has said, for us to take full advantage and understand the benefits of it, and how that has such a positive impact on our well-being. So Tahira, welcome to our podcast.
Oh, thank you, Abda. Thank you, Barbara, for inviting me to do this. What a privilege, because I've watched so many of your podcasts and I thought, oh, they're interesting, and finally I get an opportunity on one of your podcasts. So thank you for that.
Awesome. So I want to start off with a pretty simple question, and I think it's a question we kind of lay the foundation of where we are. So what are we talking when we talk about green space? What are we talking about here?
With green space, there isn't really a universal definition of what green space is, but the general consensus is that green space must include an area of vegetated land, be that in an urban area or a rural area. This could be such as parks, your garden could be a green space. Okay. Wherever there's an element of nature, and there's the other part of green space. There's also something called blue spaces, and these are areas where you see water, rivers, ponds, lakes, and equally beneficial to the body and mind. And we really need to campaign for these to exist in our cities, because without these, we'll struggle, especially in urbanized areas. We'll struggle mentally and physically as well. So, like I said, there's no real universal definition, but it's all about nature.
MashaAllah, that's a new term to me. Blue space is an interesting one. So one thing that I wanted to pick up on, and like when we got a small group and we talking about green spaces, one of the big things that is quite evident also, like as I've been growing up, and as we, like all of us have been in the local area, been growing up, the massive reduction in green space. Right? So where I live right next to the masjid, and like so we had the fields out back where the new health center has been built, and then there was something across the road where a house has been built on. We could always get onto Wetley Field, but now that's been all taken away and fenced up, and you can't get into Wetley Field. So what does this reduction of like green space, what does that do to people living in this community?
Obviously, the reduction of green spaces can have a huge impact on your mental health well-being. And if you look at it, there's about 40% of the BAME community are more likely to live in urban areas with little access to green spaces in comparison to those of the white community. And the biggest challenge of this, one of the studies, Grosvenor in 2017, he said urbanization is one of the main health relevant challenges humanity is facing in our time and will be facing for decades to come. Because when I was reading about preparing for the podcast, and I realised I read something on the United Nations World Organization report in 2018, 55. This really struck me because do you remember watching the movies in the 50s and seeing lots of greenery and so on? And, do you remember that lovely, the colours? But 55% of the world's population currently live in urban areas compared to only 30% of it, which was in the 50s. And this number is basically projected to keep growing, and it's predicted to rise to around 70% by 2050. So, although we've got this urbanization, and it's going to rise, but we still have to campaign for those green spaces, because even though the government has aimed in 2020, they did aim for by 2020 that most children should have access to green spaces. So like you're saying, where you grew up once, there was lots of access, and I saw that as well when I was growing up. And we've got that movement again where we're trying to reintroduce those green spaces, and there's lots of initiatives around that are attempting to do that. Now with my project, we're establishing a community garden, and lots of different individuals and organizations are really moving towards that green space simply because of the benefit it has for us mentally and physically. So I hope that answers your question. But there's something else, if you don't mind me saying, which is really, really fascinating. What I read was absolutely fascinating about the human eye and how we as humans, we're more inclined to see, we're more able to, our eyes see more shades of green than any other colour. So,
really?
Yeah.
MashaAllah.
That's a lot, yeah. So, the soothing power of nature has never been disputed. So if you go back to the past, and they'd always have asylums built up in green areas because they thought greenery was soothing, it de-stressed you, it made you better. And if you go back to what we visualize, we see the color green with ease, with a lot more ease in comparison to the other colors. So the human eye kind of translates waves of light into color. So we see more shades of green than any other color, and the cones in our eyes are able to kind of process these wavelengths a lot more easier, and be able to detect that. So if you think, and what also I found fascinating was, how in Islam we say Islam is the middle path, the middle way. Now green is actually right bang in the middle of the spectrum. That's why we see it a lot easier, whereas red, so the spectrum is made of between 400 to 700 nanometers. I know I'm going off track, but I just
totally making sense, Tahira.
I just kind of found it really fascinating. So between 400 and 700 nanometers of this visible spectrum, and green is about 550 nanometers. So it's just absolutely amazing how we're more inclined and we're more predisposed to want to be near nature. So there's got to be a reason behind that. Do you understand? It's not just because it's the in thing, it's actually natural. And I think we've got to really, really understand that.
That's really interesting, because that leads us nicely into the second question, which is, if that's your we gave a definition of green space. So what would your definition of well-being be? What would you say?
There's 5 major types of well-being. Your emotional well-being, where if we're emotionally relaxed and we're more resilient to situations, and we're full of self-esteem. So that's how we're well balanced in that respect. And there's a physical well-being as well. You're physically fit, physically healthy. Your social well-being, in the respect that your relationships and interaction with people is more positive, and you're not lonely, not isolated. And similarly, workplace, Barbara, you're probably enjoying this podcast, aren't you? You're very happy in your workplace environment. And societal well-being, we're able to participate in society. So well-being isn't just mental health or physical health, it's an overall state of living.
And I think the reason I asked that question is obviously through the work that I'm doing with the Trailblazer program. It is about getting children from a very early age making those life choices of appreciating outdoor space or doing activities in the outdoors, because being behind concrete four walls is quite difficult, and knowing that we're families that come from beautiful rural areas in Pakistan, outdoor space is just something we naturally gravitate to. And I think it's really important for us to really ask ourselves, are we doing enough to appreciate green spaces that are at our doorsteps, or what more can we do to preserve them? And are we green fingered, or do we need to learn about how to do that? Because I do think it really can help with your overall well-being.
I mean, green spaces, you're right. There's so many out there, and so many places. What really strikes me is when I walk past homes, it's like you said, Abida, we're from people from rural Pakistan, rural India, Bangladesh, and so on. And what we find is that people are kind of paving up their gardens if they're lucky enough to have a garden. They've concreted over their garden, very little greenery, and so on. There's this fear of being able to look after a green space or be in a green space. I mean, it's quite like you said, the benefits outweigh this having to clean your garden or whatever. It's just you've got to look at the fact that so many studies have been done around green space and mental health well-being, and even to the point that one of the studies showed how those participants who lived near greener areas were 12% lower risk of dying early deaths compared to those who are living in more built-up areas. So, the mortality rates, if you think about Bradford even, we have huge inequalities as it is, but one of the things that we can help ourselves by is being around, taking that initiative and going around and being around greener spaces, whether that's an allotment that you pick and be allotment group that you're part of, or just taking a stroll around the park on a regular basis. And for example, Hippocrates famously said, walking is a man's best medicine. And these are the things that we've got to go backwards with. I think we need to. I think our progression has kind of been our demise in a way. We've kind of. I don't think we've progressed by all these built-up areas. I think we've gone backwards. We need to be re in tune with what we are innately kind of gravitate towards, like you said, Abida, and that's green space, because it has huge benefits.
So that nicely goes into the next question. What would you say are the benefits of being in green spaces?
If I was to talk about, firstly, as a dietitian, I think green spaces have a wonderful opportunity for you to grow your own. If you've got a garden, if you don't have a garden, seek out an allotment, grow your own vegetables. So, like, for example, many people, it's well known that people who grow their own food are more inclined to have an increased diet in vegetables, so they have more vegetable-based meals rather than meat, and so and they're also inclined to having a more healthier diet. So for me, that's the most important thing, being a dietitian. But there's other things as well. When you think about screen time in the world that we're living in now, our children have iPads, iPhones, and lots of different other screens that they have access to. And one of the things I read was that screen time actually decreases memory and concentration levels in school children. And whereas going back into a natural environment, one of the benefits is that like cognition is improved and memory and your access, because what you're doing with screen time, you're kind of involuntary, just watching something and you're not really participating, you're just absorbing. Whereas when you're outside in a natural environment, you're really taking in things. When I take my kids to the woods, for instance, my son is very alert, very much. He'll come back with a pocket full of whatever, from little keepsakes from the woods, and it's what's this, and it's that excitement that you're also creating with individuals. And also another thing is, how a lot of us are, being South Asian community, we're more inclined or more at risk of having diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and so on. One of the things that green spaces can do is preventative, in the sense that the preventative measures of you not developing these non-communicable diseases like diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular disease. You're more active when you're outside. You're part of mentally. You're better. So it's just valuing that place out there. It's just not a green space. It's a therapy, and I think that's what we need to understand, that it's a therapy, and there's a reason why we see green more easier than we see other colours, built up areas, red brick and so on.
So would you say, Tahira, what, as a community, as individuals that live on local areas that are built up, how can we reclaim our green spaces? So say I'm guilty of having a concrete garden now, and I'm like, okay, oops, I shouldn't have done that. I can't undo it. How can I bring green back into my sort of street or in my garden? What kind of things are out there that will help me do that?
I mean, if you do have a built-up area, or because a lot of people who during the pandemic, we realised that it was very difficult for those children, particularly who lived in high-rise flats, and they didn't have access to a garden, sort of thing. And what you recommend would be just even having a potted plant that you were regularly looking after. And that concept of planting a seed and anticipating it to grow, you're kind of anticipating a positive future. You're already quite positive mindset that something's going to grow from this, something's going to then develop, and you are either going to benefit from the fruits of your labor, or whether be that a flower or be that a vegetable that you've grown. So it's not just a simple seed that you're actually sowing. You're actually looking at you're actually anticipating the future. You're actually seeing a beginning and an end and a middle to something. So I think just growing shrubbery near where your garden is, or just planting and looking after pots of potted plants, anything that can make you more active in that.
That's super interesting that you mentioned that. So a couple of podcasts ago, in the previous season of the podcast, we had a brother called Abdul Motin, who's got a YouTube channel called My Family Garden, where he goes out into his garden, and alhamdulillah, he's got quite a substantial garden, and he plants stuff. But one of the questions we asked him on there is like, a lot of people who are living in terrace houses, or they don't have a front garden, what can they do? And he pretty much echoed the words, or you echoed the words which he basically said, is about just plant something in a pot. And he was giving examples of small, really like easy to maintain stuff that you can do with your kids. So look, this is a new seed that I've grown. This is a new vegetable that I've grown. And he's talking about, like, I don't remember the exact vegetables and stuff that he was talking about, but he gave a lot of really good examples about really small projects that you can do with your kids. To get them involved in it as well. And even if you haven't got, all you've got is a windowsill, he was giving examples of stuff you could grow there just to get some greenery. So, and he pretty much echoed exactly what you said there, which is, alhamdulillah, really interesting. I just want to go back a little bit on an answer you gave slightly earlier about when we were talking about some of the benefits of well-being, or the definition of well-being. And what struck me was all the topics you mentioned, such about social interaction and emotional well-being, is everything that's been stripped away from us during this pandemic and lockdown, right? So how do we come back from it? Like, now that the lockdown's starting to ease, we're on, inshallah, the last phase of the opening is going to be next month. So what are some of the things we can do to help us get back to this state of well-being? A lot of people are saying, and I don't know how true this is, we're never going to get back to where we were. Time will tell whether we do or don't. But what's some of the stuff we can do in well-being to help us to get back to where we are, as close as possible, back to where we came from?
I think the first and foremost thing I'd like to say, and take this opportunity to say this, is, there's so much skepticism and lack of trust. I'd say, get that vaccine first and foremost. I've done it, my family's done it. And that's the way of moving forward, is getting vaccinated. If the whole nation is vaccinated, and we've got this resistance against this, the COVID-19, and that's the most important thing first and foremost, because that builds trust as well, doesn't it? It's about trust and what's happened. And with so much negativity has come from the media, and it's putting that aside and saying, look, we've taken the means, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the means, doesn't he? And we've got to then take them and then trust in Allah for what we have to, what He's provided us with. So that's the most important thing first and foremost for me. And then slowly taking that opportunity to then try to sort of start new initiatives, start a new project, start your new little planting pot that you've got, start getting together with your neighbours and have a look at how you can participate in local activities, whether that's street cleans or any other thing that you think is going to bring people together in a safe, socially distant way. But the most important thing is for me is trust, and I think we've got to build on that by taking the good and leaving behind the negativity that we've seen during the pandemic, and I think that's the only way forward for us to reach some kind of normal.
Oh, mashallah, that's very interesting. The other thing, and I think I alluded to this pretty early on when we were talking about green space, and green space is being reduced in my local area, which is the Garlington area, is to do with what are some of the barriers that are stopping us doing this, what we're talking about here. So what are the barriers to accessing green space? Like, there's some physical ones that I mentioned earlier, like our Wetley Fields, they've actually physically put a barrier around it, so we can't even get into Wetley Field, whereas that used to be our playing ground, right? So we used to come back from mosque, or just before mosque, we used to go out, have a game of footy, come back in all muddied up, get shouted at and stuff like that. But that was all the good stuff that used to happen. But like all the local green space has gone in this area. Now I have to go to West Park, which isn't too far away, but it's much more of an effort to go over to West Park. So what are some of the barriers to green space in these days and age?
I think, first of all, we're talking about the place where you're saying they've actually literally physically put a barrier up, is find out why they've done that. I think it's important to find out why they've done that. Is it for safety reasons? Is it because it's not been adopted and so on? And the reason why I say that is because where I live, there was a kind of a disused, derelict land that was just blocked off. Nobody was taking responsibility for it until I got hold of, the local person responsible for the land, and I said, look, we need to find out why we can't use this land. And now we're actually producing, working towards creating a community garden in that area. So first of all, find out what's going on, and also I know that in Girlington there's a project called Greener Girlington. They're actually trying to produce a community garden near to where one of the is it called a hospice, or I'm not quite sure, opposite Al Mustafa there's an area that
yeah.
Yeah, is it like an elderly
home? Yeah,
elderly home.
Yeah. So I know that they're trying to create a pocket park in there, but I think it's just at the moment it's just concreted place sort of land, but that's potentially a community garden for everybody, and working with the local community centre as well, and looking at other avenues that you can sort of start developing around the community. And the most important thing, I think, is getting your community together and working as one, because what we're all doing, we're quite fragmented. Somebody's doing something here and somebody's doing something there, but we're not all coming together, because we're all actually talking about the same thing and wanting the same things, but we're not really working together. Because if you think about it, you're better as one group, a larger group, than on your own. And also West Park, you have West Park, that's perfectly good, and they've done, I think, the Green Mile around there as well. And they've created that, and that's another way. And I know that another lady called Mumtaz Khan, she's also doing walks, that green ladies only walking sessions that she's delivering every week in the morning. So it's trying to tap into what's actually happening, because you might find that there's a lot of things happening, getting people to access green spaces, and some of the barriers are that we're not aware of what is going on, whether that's because of antisocial behavior and we don't want to move out and have a look around, or whether, you know, some places are derelict and you think, oh, there's no point going there. These are all barriers. And one of the other thing I find is that we as a group of people, or you know, community, and this doesn't happen just in my local area, it happens everywhere, is that I see so many places that have just got waste food, chapatis thrown down, you know, whether it's for pigeons or whatever, and people are kind of like, in a way, trying to do a good deed by not wasting food, but actually they've created a mess and a whole load of other domino effect, to whether it's more rats in the area, or you know, disease and upsetting your neighbors. So we've got to weigh out, how are we really using our green spaces, because we might then, our actions might be causing somebody else then not to come into that green space, and therefore we've denied somebody a perfectly good green space. So we've got to, I don't know if you find that around Girlington, Barbara or Abida, you know, where you see so many people littering the area and potential green spaces.
Yeah, I definitely think we need to reclaim, and I definitely believe that before we lose any more green space, as a community, we need to mobilize ourselves. We need people, leaders to come forward, people who have the skill set to initiate these things. So obviously, going back to the work that I'm doing with Masjid-e-Umar, for example, we need local place-based groups on a neighborly level who are willing to take that responsibility, because the question I would ask is, what are we going to leave for the next generation? You know, and how do we get them to benefit from this, and how do we give them the sort of, how do we enable them to continue to preserve the green space? Because if we don't, we are going to see more concrete, and it, hand in hand, not having that green environment or appreciating green space is going to have an impact on our well-being. So we need to get them as a community to offer more opportunities, initiatives to get children to understand and know their local area and where the green spaces are, but also further afield, make them have that sort of desire or wanting to be in green space themselves. Instead of, like, if they had the choice, which would be very difficult, between a screen and going to green space, you would want your child to say, yeah, mom, dad, let's get away. And I think that's something that through the Trailblazer program we're trying to promote, is enabling and empowering organizations to have the capacity and resource to then offer these activities to local people in the local area. So, for example, getting out in green space, whether that's you're taking the family out, whether you take up a physical activity like cycling, whether you start a running group or a running club, you know, whatever. But as individuals, we all need to do our bit. And I think that's what's going to allow us, they're going to come hand in hand, because when we do things in our green space, that's what's going to make us preserve our green space. But if we stop wanting to do stuff in green spaces, them disappearing won't make a difference to us. And I think that's a really important thing that we need to really ask ourselves. What are we doing in our green spaces? Are we utilizing them? Are we having things on a local level? And what more can we do? Because I think there's so much more we could do as a community.
I agree, Abida, and I think just going back to how you're saying we've got to mobilize ourselves as a community, and I think we have also got to hold account to those who are advocating, who are saying that they are facilitating. So, you know, like looking at Greener Girlington, Well Bradford, and so on, they have kind of what's the word I'm looking for? They've said, or they propose that they are going to be creating this green space for the community. So people living in Girlington need to be aware of what's happening and need to then hold those account to who have got funding for these projects to say, hang on a minute, you said you were going to develop this, so why are we not developing it? Why is it not being developed? So that's another thing we've got to do as a community, and I'm a firm believer in that. And you know, the fact that we have thousands of pounds of funding that can go out, and I want people to do that to Abilities Together as well. I want them to hold our organization into account to say, you said you were going to create a community garden. Have you done that? What's happening? So we've got to take that initiative. Sometimes what we do as a community is we sit back and say, oh, well, somebody's going to do it. Fly tipping, for instance, people just leave things and think, oh, well, the council's going to pick it up. But, nobody takes the initiative to ring somebody and say, look, somebody's just done this. If we're all, Islamically, we're khalifas of this dunya, aren't we? We are responsible for this world, what goes on, how we look after it. And I read a beautiful proverb years ago, which a friend of mine sent me from Brazil back in the days when you could have pen pals, and she sent me this wonderful proverb that the world is lent to us by our children, and it doesn't belong to us. It basically belongs to our children, and they've just lent it to us, and so on. So we have to, like you said, Abida, we've got to create a nicer place for our children, and that's the way I want to work, is to be able to create something nice for my children and instill that in them to create something nice for theirs. So you're constantly wanting to improve, and I think that's what we've lost as a community, is that constant desire to live in an improved situation, to live in a better environment, and holding people to account and saying, have you really done what you're meant to, what you pledged that you would? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you mentioned some organizations there in the answer to the question there. So can you just go over some of the organizations that are like running some of this stuff, which is for green space?
Yeah.
So you mentioned.
So
mention them. I just want to note them down, if that's all right, so I can hold them, so I can find out who they are.
Yeah, Well Bradford, I think they have pledged that Well Bradford are part of the hospital. They've been funded, and the Greener Girlington has been funded through Well Bradford, I believe, or other organisations. Don't hold me to account to that. That's something you need to ask them who's been funded. But they are, and it's a wonderful idea that they've got, that they're going to refurbish this concreted land and create a pocket park for the community, and and it's really nice. And I can understand that pandemic has caused some delays and so on, but
100%.
People really need to hold people account, and I ask my community to hold me to account, because any funding that Abilities Together receives, thank you Together for Health and Bradford Council for funding us, but any funding that I receive, I want my community to know about it, and I'm very open and transparent about that, because that's on the Day of Judgment, speaking to a Muslim audience or a non-Muslim, I'm going to be accountable for that, whether that's in this dunya, or but definitely in the akhirah, I'll be accountable for that. And I think we need to also support organizations to say, why has this not happened? Do you need more volunteers? Can we volunteer for you? And so on, just to keep it into a positive thing, not a negative thing, but work with these organizations to achieve what you want to achieve for the better of the larger community.
I think there's another thing that we have to be really mindful of, which is organizations are set up, come into an area, and they look at the population and they say, there are these issues in this community, whether that be health or well-being. But the fact of the matter is it's people within the community. Then for them to come in and embed something, and for there to be sustainability, we need to claim and step up that and grab that baton to move things on. And I think that's sometimes where we may fall short, because we people don't come forward, and as a community, we really need to ask ourselves, what more can we do individually and collectively? Is there a gap in my local area that I could fill for the betterment of my community?
Absolutely, and I really advise everybody who's community-based to read this wonderful one. I'm always forever tweeting and retweeting him. Russell Cormac Russell, his book called Rekindling Democracy, and what that's about is exactly what you've just said, Abida, is the fact that the concept of giving back people the power to do something. So what we don't want is top down, somebody from above telling us, we see that this this Girlington over here has got very little green space, and we're seeing that there's antisocial behaviour here, and we're seeing this. Let's fix it. No, actually, you need to allow the people who live in that area to come to solutions. As you need to support them to get the best solution, because they know, they've lived in that environment. They know what's happening. You can't keep doing things to a community. You have to work with the community to engage that community into bringing up solutions and developing solutions that are then going to be long term, because studies show that if you work with people, it's going to be long term, and giving them ownership of something. Similarly, with the community garden that we've worked on here, it's very much about the community. It's not abilities together or whatever. It's a community garden that belongs to the community, and they have come up with the ideas, with the developing plan, with the design and everything. And they've also, some have been adverse to it and said, no, we don't want it. It's going to create more of antisocial behaviour. And one of the nicest comments we heard was, actually, if we do have a community garden there, we're going to all be there present, watching out what's happening, and we can then say to the young lads that are standing around causing trouble, and say, actually, can you either move along, or join in with us? It's one of those ways, and that's, if you can't, that's how we've got to work. I'm very much for people and power.
Yeah. I think, yeah. I mean, I suppose what I'd want to know is, I mean, we're coming into the summer now, and we have been locked up and locked inside. What are the local opportunities that you're aware of that are where people could get involved in, like whether that's project level organization that you are aware of, that they could get out and do stuff? Because I think that's the nervous thing that I think Barbara was mentioning, that people are hesitant, aren't they? They're like, well, where can I go and what can I do that's local to me, that'll slowly get me back out to some sort of normality?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, working with the voluntary sector, you can definitely do that. Go to the VCS organisations and look them up and have a look at what they're doing. Allotment groups, whether if we just want to stick to the green spaces concept, there are many allotment groups around. At Scotchman Road allotments, they have ladies only sessions. I had a children's only group running just before the pandemic, hopefully going to re-establish that, and just going in. And if even I know that the hospital have also got a garden coming up, and that's something, just talking to the hospital and saying, I'd like to be very much about your development of your garden space, and again, it's not just for the staff or anybody, it's for the wider community as well. So it's just really doing a bit of your research, and whether it's coming to abilities together, whether it's going to the Girlington Community Centre, who I'm sure have wonderful projects running, similarly going to Greener Girlington, Well Bradford, and so on, and asking these organisations to be part of them, whatever, in whatever capacity, because people are always kind of looking for volunteers, and I know I'm certainly looking for volunteers, so anybody's welcome to come join me.
Fantastic.
So one topic that I want to just touch on. I can't have a registered dietitian on the podcast without talking about food, because one thing. So I run on a side. I run this little gym, and people often come to me, and one of the first things I ask them is, what do you want to get out of this experience of coming to this gym? And one of the big ones is always, I want to lose weight. And I'm like, fine, I can do the bit where I can make you work really hard, and that'll help you. But one of the things that I don't advise on, because I don't have expertise on it, is the dietitian side of it, right? What they need to eat. So for a healthier diet, what advice would you give to people from South Asian community? So if they had to change stuff to lose weight, get healthier, fitter, all them type of niche sort of questions that are asked, what would your advice be around that?
So around that would be, a lot of my work is, I'm a diabetes specialist dietitian. So, so my work is around diabetes, prevention of diabetes, and managing diabetes, and what we always look at is the overall benefit of kind of like a varied diet. So you're having, if you go back to the food, the Eat Well plate, so you've got your five a day plus, not just 5. So that includes your 5
Okay.
fruit and vegetables and so on, and keeping mindful of your carbohydrates and anything of your rice, whatever, pastas and so on, and not having too much of your oily, greasy, sweet stuff. Having enough of your dairy products and so on. So that's just the basic, and your protein as well. But most of all, I always say I look at portion size. Often, as the Asian community, we have kind of forget. We think, oh, we're having, but I only eat this much rice, and this much rice is often a whole plate of rice. And if we look at the servings and so on, you've basically had far too much of your serving in one portion. So going back to the serving, so without getting specific, what the servings are and so on, and I'm happy to help and advise anybody with this, but it's looking at the portion size. Don't eat, and going back to the 3 segments of how we should eat. So 1/3 of your stomach is for food, another for water, another for air. Never eating to the point where you are so full that you just are bursting. It's almost stopping where you think, I could have a little bit more. So it's just having everything in balance, and just kind of going back to the other thing about groups. And I completely forgot to mention this wonderful organization, Bradford for Better. I really wanted to mention that, because you can pick up so many things as a group as well, and you can talk about things. And one of the things you could, I guess, mention in there is diet and exercise and so on. But the group in itself is just does a huge amount of work around Bradford and cleaning up Bradford itself. So I really had to. I'm really sorry, just go off on track, but I had to, because it just came back to me, and I just thought I need to mention them. They're just a wonderful initiative that's on quite well known on social media.
Oh my God. And thank you for that advice for around nutrition base. Sorry, I know I threw that in there. We're talking about green space and stuff, but it's a question that always comes up. And since I got someone here that I can ask, I had to ask it. So the other thing, we've been talking about green space and reclaiming green space, and we've been talking about all the stuff that we can do about our mental well-being and stuff. So what are some of the activities that we can do in these green spaces? So for example, West Park, and obviously there's the play area and stuff like that, but what are some other activities we can do in these green spaces?
If you want to tap into your local organization, so you've got your Honor Jiu-Jitsu on a bike, and so in the green spaces you've got the cycling that you can do in, for instance, the Green Mile, specifically talking about West. You've got your Green Mile that you can walk. I think it's from the top of St Edmunds
down Girlington Road, isn't it?
All the way around, and then by then you'll have done a mile sort of thing. But not just focusing on West Park, looking around other areas. We've got wonderful Heaton Woods, we've got Cottingley Woods, we've got so just by driving 5 or 10 minutes away out of Bradford, you're in the countryside. This is how lucky we are in Bradford. We've got access to just greenery everywhere, really. That's one of the benefits of being in Bradford, is that you can just drive a little bit. You're in Skipton, a little further, and you're in Bingley and so on, and Haworth. So it's just walking. I would recommend walking definitely anywhere and everywhere, ditching your car and just doing that, definitely. Yeah. And that will help you lose weight, because you're reducing the calories and working off the food, extra portions that you're eating.
So you've mentioned a couple of places there, and I noted down Cottingley Woods, Heaton Woods. Obviously, there's West Park there. Last week when the councillor was on, the week before that, sorry, last week was Palestine. The week before that, the councillor was on, and he was talking about getting funding, because Manningham Park has just gone through this big renovation where he's got a new play area. I still need to go there. Inshallah, I will go there soon with my little ones, obviously not myself. But West Park is trying to get some more. There's some funding coming through, and they're trying to get some funding to renovate West Park, because that's been a while since that renovation happened. Where are the big places that we can go? Because I remember when the lockdown started, right? So one of the things I was trying to search for online was like, where can I go for walks, right? And there were a couple of parks locally, and then we went out. There was a reservoir not so far from here that we went there. So where are the big places that we can go, or not even big places we can go to get them walks in that you were talking about, go have a kickabout, play some football, to green spaces locally? Do you know any that we can take advantage of?
Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned Lister Park. You've got Roberts Park. You can go. There's lots of different parks that you can. There's the Shipley Park. Even it's just literally just walking around. It's just, even if you've got like behind Lister Mills, there's a green area that belongs to Urban Splash. But the thing is, you don't necessarily have to go quite further afield. It's just finding any space. So you've got the new Pocket Park up on Scotchman Road, to get to, if it's just about being active. But green spaces, obviously, you're looking at Chelodine, for instance. These are all places. There's West Bowling. There's a wonderful park up there. So it's we don't necessarily have to spend an awful lot to get to these places. A lot of them are just either a walk away or a bus ride away, or and that, or even a cycling trip away, sort of thing. So it's just not about looking for the nicer areas or whatever. But we've got some wonderful facilities within Bradford itself, and within the inner city area as well. We've all those that you've mentioned, all those that I've mentioned. So it's just about being a bit more mindful and proactive and looking for these places, rather than and often we kind of think, oh, it's just Lister Park, but actually, it's quite a wonderful, beautiful park, really, isn't it? So really taking advantage of what we've got.
I think the other thing that, and I think the council got to be given a little bit of credit for this, is the space they're creating in town centre as well. So when them fountains that go up on that, you were talking earlier about the blue space, a new term to me, but they've created a really, really nice blue space, so to speak, in that, with that fountain area, and they're looking to expand that with they've got some green space in there as well. So there's some good stuff going on in town, where if people work in that area, they can always jump out for lunch and spend some time, so you're not always sitting in front of a screen. You can spend a bit of your lunchtime just going out and seeing some of that greenery, seeing some of that not open water, seeing some of the water from that fountain when that's turned on. And I think that's a good initiative that has brought some green space back to the town centre. Because if you go back before that city park was there, it was all that urban building, right? There was no green space at all. But I'm glad that, like, when I saw it first come up, I thought, how's this gonna look? But I think it has really changed the dynamic of our city centre. Having some water there, having some green space there. Now when you see, especially when the sun's out, which isn't often, but when the weather's decent, you do see people out using that green space, which has really changed the dynamic of our city centre, I believe, which is good.
I agree, and I think it's again, that blue space. It's creating that blue space, but you've probably upset quite a few older people who probably liked that old Bradford city centre, and it had a lot of beautiful trees there, and and I think they've tried to retain that. But it is a wonderful space now, and it's really nice the way it's been developed and so on. And landscapes at Bradford Council have done a fantastic job on that, and further on as well, they've done a lot of huge developmental programs going on. Pocket Park and Scotchman Road, for instance. I don't know whether you guys have been or not, but part of Joiners Move Play, the Jump project have really been at the forefront of having created that. And they've Peel Park, for instance, they've also helped refurbish that as well. So there is this, like the government had pledged that green space for every child, and should have access to that. It is happening. There is a movement, and people are, and the powers that be have recognised that green spaces are very useful for the mental health and physical well-being of people, of the public. Therefore, we've got these green spaces. So I agree. I think some of the places what we've got, Barbara, now are really wonderful to see and quite nice. And you're right, in the summertime before the pandemic, you'd see loads of people accessing that water area. It was, absolutely. And I think we're very lucky still in Bradford to have those.
100%.
I have a bit of a question as well, Tahira. What would you say when it comes to community groups that could benefit from green space for their well-being? Like, what would you say that the specifics of those groups are, and why should they do that, for example? So to give you an example, we know that obesity is concerning for our communities. What can we do about that? Is it for families to understand that, in order to change behaviors of the next generation, what do we need to do? How can we do it?
Yeah, I like the fact that you said family, because I'm very much for the whole family approach, in the sense that obesity isn't just the problem of one individual in the family. You have to look at the whole family and their behavior, and that's very, very important, in the sense that green space is there. You can just, like I said, one of the benefits were for not to develop these non-communicable diseases like obesity, in the sense that the more you're out and about, you're less likely to be sat down watching the screen and so on. But you're also looking at the whole family. You're kind of working with, and I guess with the Trailblazer project, you are probably doing some of that. And I know Jump are doing the whole family approach and educating the family about it's not just the individual, but we have to look at the behavior of everybody to understand that actually there's a prevalence of obesity in this family because of their behavior. And also then utilizing, because if you go back to the benefits of green spaces, they're a free alternative to therapies, and they're already there. And lots of social prescribing now focuses on green space therapy, and that's what we have to look at now. And we don't necessarily have to be referred to by a GP to go access some green space. If it's there on your doorstep, and if it's not, go access it, go find it, go out and be active. And that's the most important message that we can tell people, is be active, use your green spaces before they're taken away from us, because if they're not, the people are going to start building on them and so on. And that's what it's about. It's just utilizing spaces for the benefit of not just the mind, but the body overall.
Thank you.
So, mashallah, I think we've come towards the end of the podcast. We're almost up to an hour. So, inshallah, I'm going to introduce next week's podcast. But before we go on to closing off the podcast, Tahira, if you had to leave our audience with a message that they could take away from this podcast, what would your underlying message be?
And that's a big ask. I think what it would be, just seek out your green space, even just once a week. If you just go with your families, just enjoy that time, whether it's just to sit down and just talk as a family, or if even not as a family, as an individual on your own, just go take some time out in an area where it's just about you, and understand how, and then be part, and then get involved in other organizations that are part of green space activity, and then just start campaigning for more green spaces.
Mashallah. Sister Abida, I know you have an organization which is really doing a lot for children in this area. Do you want to quickly just mention them and some of the work that they're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really fortunate to be working for the Childhood Obesity Trailblazer program, and we're doing some amazing work in the local community with local organizations. So, I'm so fortunate to be working with local Islamic religious settings, because we believe that as organizations, we're almost underutilized. We've got the potential to be doing so much more. And I think a point I wanted to make that Tahira mentioned, I think as a community, we've got this collective approach, in the sense that when people start doing things collectively, that's what really momentum happens. We're not from a community where people just can do things on their own as much, so to speak. Like when you hear the imam of the masjid, or when you see an organization endorsing something or promoting something, that's when people want to really get involved. And I think that's where the Trailblazer program really wants to build that capacity of our Islamic religious settings, our masjids and madrasas, to say, how can we work more closely together to set up things like walking groups, to set up any sort of sessions, activities for mothers and daughters, fathers and sons, and the whole family. And I think that's the thing that I feel families want, is they just want to know, well, where can I go for this? And yes, we need to motivate people a bit, But I think what I'd love to see is I'd love people to feel like, actually, I've got an idea. Where can I make this idea come to fruition? Like, where can I go? And, I really would urge people that are tuned in today or who might listen to this podcast is, go find out what is going on in your local community, especially your Islamic religious setting. Because I think what I really feel, if you look back in the time of the Prophet, peace upon him, the masjid was much more than that. There was so many other activities going on. It wasn't just this place where people used to pray and seek Islamic knowledge. You used to have people taking part in fencing or horse riding. And, there's so many other trade and transaction going on. Gardens were there, beautiful gardens were there. If you look around the Muslim world, countries that we go to, the gardens are just beautiful. So, even find out about your local place of worship that you go. See if they've got a garden, help them create a garden, or, have an allotment that's close by. And that's going to be so beneficial, not just for the children, but also the families as well. And I think we need to really sort of, grab this opportunity, because it's a rarity. And I really want people to be able to sort of get out there and do as much as they can.
MashaAllah. So one of the things you was really good segue into the next bit. So Masjid Umar are building this new masjid, and you might have seen it on some of the promotional stuff that we've done. MashaAllah, the masjid is, from the exterior, is standing. The downstairs is pretty much ready. What we want to do is we want to try getting the girls' madrasa into the bottom section, because if any of us have been to where the girls are studying now, we'd be ashamed to say that we're treating our next generation of girls and putting them in them cabins. We have to do something to get them out. The downstairs masjid is pretty much complete. We need to do some work just on the outside, just to make it safe, to meet all our health and safety regulations, and then we can move them in. So we're so close. So along the bottom, I've just put the sort code, account number, and other ways to donate. That last push, so we can get them girls into a place that they deserve. If you haven't seen the downstairs, I believe there's something on our Facebook which has got some pictures and stuff of our downstairs space. It's an amazing new space. We've got dedicated classrooms. We've got dedicated prayer areas where ladies can come in and pray. One of the big drawbacks at the moment of our current masjid is a very male only. Male only. The namazs are only for males. Everything's very male. There's no real female interaction in there. So the new masjid has a whole dedicated floor which has been designed just for the ladies to come in. It's segregated, so the entrance is at a different place. Alhamdulillah, it's been thought out really well by the people who have been working on it. So we need donations to get that over the line. If you like what we're putting out in terms of content, hit the like and subscribe button. It'll help us just get our recognition up there, reach more people. So that'd be awesome. Next week's podcast, Maulana Hayat Khan is on, and he is doing how do you say this?
Homeopathic?
Thank you very much. Medicine and hijama. So he's going to be talking about that stuff, which is something that I'm actually quite interested in, because I've always wanted to go do hijama, but I've always been like, okay, I know it's a sunnah, but who do you go to? Where do you go to? How do you do? What are the things to look for? Because I'm not. Oh, Sister Tahira put a hand up there. Yeah. There's something that you do, something you offer.
My husband's a homeopath, and I also do hijama, and he does hijama as well.
Oh, subhanallah. Subhanallah. we could have brought you on for that podcast. We didn't know. But Maulana,
no, we're only friends and family.
Mashallah. So Maulana Sahab's going to come on. He's going to talk about that and the benefits of it, and that this is sunnah, and why we should do it, and what we should look out for. So inshallah, tune in for that next week at 7 o'clock. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.